All right, so now we're recording. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm your host and moderator, Kat Polakines. A bit about me, I am a research assistant at the Center for Health Equity Education and Research, and I worked with Cathy on the initiative we will present to you today. Cathy is also joining us, and I'll introduce her in a moment. Thank you all for taking the time to join us as we talk about supporting lactating employees in the workplace. So to start off, I'll introduce our organization and the initiative that gathers us here today. The Center for Health Equity, Education and Research, or CHEER, is a center for maternal and child health equity, advocacy, and research. We work to increase health equity by collaborating with community-based partners and focusing on underserved populations. CHEER has a program, CHAMPS, which stands for Communities and Hospitals Advancing Maternity Practices. This program focuses on equity and breastfeeding and promoting baby-friendly practices. CHAMPS has worked in Mississippi for almost 10 years, and we are excited to continue our work. The CHAMPS initiative that gathers us here today is Mississippi Wins, or Mississippi Workplaces Improving Nursing Support. This initiative is to support Mississippi businesses with implementing lactation policies and support systems for the lactating employees. You will leave this webinar with a summary of the requirements of federal law and the PUMP Act, an understanding of how to support lactating employees, and how to reach businesses and employers, and finally, resources to support this important work. A bit of housekeeping before we get started. As usual, we have a chat box where you can submit comments and a Q&A box for your questions, which we'll answer at the end of the session. Please feel free to share your experiences in the chat. We would love to read your thoughts about breastfeeding in the workplace or working with businesses as a breastfeeding advocate. Also, no worry to take notes. As we stated before, this webinar will be recorded and will be posted to our website, cheerequity.org, by the end of the week. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce our wonderful speaker, Cathy Carothers. All right, Cathy. I will read your bio now. So Cathy Carothers is co-director of Every Mother Incorporated, a nonprofit organization providing counseling and lactation training for health professionals across the United States. Cathy is an international board certified lactation consultant since 1996, past president and fellow of the International Lactation Consultant Association, and past chair of the United States Breastfeeding Committee. In 2014, she was honored with the National Leadership Award in the Friend of WIC category from the National WIC Association. She currently serves as the North American representative of the World Alliance for Breastfeeding Action Steering Committee, which works on global advocacy for the rights of breastfeeding parents at work. She has provided more than 800 training events in the field of lactation in every US state and territory and in many countries, including state-level workshops for employers and community advocates on worksite lactation support in 40 states. She has worked with the HHS Office of Women's Health and Maternal and Child Health Bureau, as well as several states, to develop national and state-level resources for supporting employed breastfeeding mothers. Finally, she joins us today to work with CHAMPS to implement the Mississippi Wins projects, which we will discuss today. She has also worked with national business organizations and the breastfeeding community to help nursing parents make it work while at work. She's a mother of 5 adult breastfed children, now ages 30 to 42, and Nana to 11 beautiful breastfed grandchildren, ages 5 months to 18. Thank you, Cathy, for joining us.
Thank you so very much, Kat, and welcome to all of you. I was looking at the participant list and I see a lot of good friends that I've known through the years, as well as some newcomers that perhaps I have not met yet. So I'm going to welcome all of you to this webinar, and I have one little update to my bio because I have grandbaby number 12 that I just found out is on the way. So there will be 12, maybe January or February of 2024. We're delighted to welcome all of you to this webinar, which is designed for educators, businesses, and others outside Mississippi. We have a lot of Mississippi people here, but a lot of folks outside the state as well. And we know that you are heavily involved in supporting breastfeeding families when they return to work. And what an opportune time to celebrate the progress we've made in supporting lactating families at work. During World Breastfeeding Week, This is a picture of one of my grandchildren. This picture, if you look closely at the little outfit she is wearing, it is filled with lots of little different sizes and types of breasts. My daughter-in-law found this fabric, had this beautiful outfit made, and took this picture that she presented to me. It was blown up on a big canvas and gave it to me for Christmas a year and a half ago. And it is one of my most treasured possessions. I have it hanging in my office where I can look at her beautiful face all the time. But I love the fact she's clapping, because she is letting us know we have made great progress in supporting breastfeeding. We still have work to do, but we've made incredible progress together. So I want to just point out this year's World Breastfeeding Week theme. Every year, the World Alliance for Breastfeeding Action that I am a part of, I'm the North American representative to this organization, to their steering committee. And the theme that we set this year was called Enabling Breastfeeding, making a difference for working parents. And I really love that theme, and I think it fits beautifully with what we are talking about today. It's a reminder that we need to mobilize our communities to work together, really, to dismantle some of those barriers at work that can make it hard for parents to meet their breastfeeding goals. Also, in addition to the WABA theme, the United States Breastfeeding Committee also has determined that the entire month of August should be used to celebrate breastfeeding. And the theme that they have identified for the whole month of August is "This is our why." And it's just a reminder to us that in our communities, there are many, many different reasons why we need to promote and support breastfeeding. And you can see some of the reasons listed here, but they include meeting the needs of employed parents at work. So with that in mind, I'm going to dive right on into some of our major focus areas. There are 3 focus areas I'm going to address in this webinar. First of all, we're going to give a brief update on workplace legislation that affects breastfeeding employees. Secondly, we're going to look at some ways to support employed parents with breastfeeding or chest feeding. And thirdly, we will look at some strategies for how we can work collaboratively with business employers to improve on-site support for breastfeeding parents at work. And then following that section, we're going to tell you more about the brand new resources that we have developed from the CHAMPS program that you can use to advocate for new families in your community. So we'll begin by looking at part 1, which is on workplace legislation. And as many of you may already know, 2023 has really been a banner year for breastfeeding support in the workplace. The PUMP Act and the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act became law at the very, very end of 2022. And thanks to all the media attention around those 2 laws, many businesses are now a little bit more aware of the needs of pregnant and lactating employees and their responsibilities to support them. So I want to take a quick look at these laws, because I know there are always a lot of people on a webinar like this that are not really familiar with the tenets of these laws or how they're different from what was already in place before. So let's take a look first at the federal nursing breaks law. Way back in 2011, the federal nursing breaks law was enacted, and this law amended the Fair Labor Standards Act, or it's also referred to as the FLSA. And what that did is it required employers to provide breastfeeding employees with time and space to express milk at work. It was a great law. It was a really important first step, huge first step, actually. But there were some really big gaps because they ended up housing the law in Section 7 of FLSA, which is the section that applies to hourly workers. And those workers are actually classified as quote unquote non-exempt. In other words, they are not exempt from overtime. But by placing the law there, it inadvertently left out around 9 million salaried workers across the country, and that's 1 out of every 4. And that included teachers and nurses and agricultural workers and many other classifications of salaried workers. Also, the federal nursing breaks law in 2011 had no teeth to it. As a result, we found over the years, many employers just ignored the law. They just didn't feel like it was something they wanted to do. And we also found that when employees complained about it and tried to get legal repercussions so that they could have their rights supported, they were unable to file action to secure their rights. So the PUMP Act was implemented to address these gaps and to rectify these issues that had emerged. So the PUMP Act stands for providing urgent maternal protections. And this law was very exciting. It was the very first standalone breastfeeding bill that came to a vote in the House and the Senate. It passed the House back in October of 2021 in a very strong bipartisan vote. And it took a while to get the Senate to be ready to vote on it, but the Senate did vote on it in December, and it was approved in a practically unanimous vote of 92-5. And as a result, just a couple of days later, President Biden then signed it into law on December 29th. So this PUMP Act was huge. It made several very significant changes to the nursing breaks law by ensuring now that nearly all employees would now have legal protection of their rights to express milk at work. And I've included a link here at the bottom that you could go to read more about the actual language of the law, as well as to get some resources from the Department of Labor. And I wanted you all to know that I did prepare a handout for you that lists a host of wonderful resources, and Kat will put that in the chat box at some point so that you'll have that. So you don't have to write down all these links. That's the bottom line. You don't have to write anything down. All these links should be in your handout. So let's quickly look at just kind of a brief overview of the provisions of the federal law, and then I'm going to break that down and talk about it in just a little more detail. So first of all, businesses. Businesses of all sizes are required to provide reasonable break time and a clean private space for lactating workers to express milk. Now, the law does say that if a business has fewer than 50 employees, they are still expected to comply, even if they have a small number of staff. However, it's possible that they might be excused from complying if doing so would pose or impose, I guess, a significant difficulty or expense, which is also called undue hardship. However, that being said, I want to remind you that undue hardship is actually extremely rare. And we have found over the years that in almost every situation, even in very small businesses, solutions are available to make it work. So that's where you all come in as advocates in being able to provide support and education to employers in your community on how they can make it work. The PUMP Act does clarify now that nearly all workers, regardless of whether they are classified as non-exempt or exempt, now have the same rights to protection. I just want to cry every time I say those words, because we have been advocating for this for, well, almost 10 years. And we finally have this in place. This shouldn't be so hard, but it apparently was a very time-consuming and a very difficult process. The law does require that employers provide lactating employees with reasonable break time to express milk at work. And the law is very specific. It says each time it is needed. So that doesn't mean once in a blue moon somebody can express milk, but each time they need to express milk, they should be given that reasonable break time to do so. The space that is available must be a private place that is not a bathroom for them to express milk. And very, very enthusiastically, I will say that the PUMP Act now gives workers legal opportunities to file either a complaint with the Department of Labor at the federal level, or they can take a private right of action if they feel that their needs and their rights are being violated. So we'll kind of break this down now and just take a little bit closer look. So who is covered? Well, since 2011, hourly workers have been able to express milk in a wide variety of job settings where they're covered. But now with the PUMP Act, most of our salaried workers are now also covered, and that includes our teachers and our agricultural and farm workers and our hospital nurses. There are currently two exceptions, I guess we could say, to who would be covered. So I want to make sure we're aware the accommodations will be are currently, airline pilots and flight crew are currently not included in the law. That being said, some airlines already have their own policies in place to provide support. And actually, it can be done even for pilots and for flight crews, especially it's going to be a challenge on a very, very long flight. So it is something that I know USVC is still working on. We're still advocating for, and we are hopeful that we'll be able to reach a compromise or reach some level of understanding with senators who were very concerned about safety issues. Another thing that is a little bit different is for motor coach and rail operators. And these are people who are responsible for actually moving the vehicle. And although they are covered under the law, their protections have been delayed until December of 2025. So this just gives those industries a little bit more time to figure out how they're going to retrofit a bus or retrofit that train to be able to make it possible for those operators to provide support. Now, I will point out that other workers who are not involved as people who are moving vehicles are actually pilots and flight attendants. Everybody else in that industry does need to be supported. So gate attendants in the airport and the ground crew and all these other individuals, they do still have to be supported. They were not exempted from the law. Also, the law requires that employers provide reasonable breaks whenever it's needed to express milk, and it must be provided for up to 1 year after the baby's birth. Although I will say many employers do allow employees to pump beyond a year if that is needed. Most employees will express milk during the regular breaks that the company may already provide. The company is not required to pay employees for that break time unless they pay for those regular breaks for other employees. So if every other employee gets a paid break, they can't not pay that lactating employee just because they choose to use their break to express milk. Also, if the employee needs more time, and many employees will need more time than the 15-minute break that they're allowed, they are not required to compensate them for that extra time. However, many employees are given that time. Some employers do not require them to clock in and out. It just kind of depends on the business. Now, what's also new with the Pump Act is that if the employee chooses to work during the time that they're expressing milk, as this mother is doing, they must be compensated for that work. Now, I want to just remind us, not every woman wants to pump or work while they're pumping. Some parents would find it a little bit too stressful to get the milk to flow, while others may find that working actually takes their mind off of the milk collection process, and they may find that their milk flows better. So it really is an individual decision. But if they are working during that break period, they have to pay them for the work that they have done. The law also requires that the space, this is very similar to the original law, the space for breastfeeding has to be private, has to be free from intrusion from both coworkers and the public. The space does not have to be a dedicated lactation room, and that's where a lot of people get confused. They think employees have to be given a dedicated room, just like this beautiful room that I took this picture of at a hospital in California. And it's a beautiful room. It's very restful and relaxing. It's a great place, I would think, to express milk. But they're not required to provide that. They just have to provide a private space, which could be a more flexible environment. But the law is very specific that the space cannot be a bathroom stall. And this is because airborne bacteria, which is certainly prevalent in a restroom, can easily get into the breast pump device and contaminate the milk. And this mother she's pumping for a vulnerable baby or child. And the last thing we want her to do is to put her child at risk. And as you can see from this picture, it's also pretty cumbersome. And I think the requirements for that space to be functional for milk expression would not be met in this environment. There's no electrical outlet. This mother is sitting on an open commode, doesn't even have a lid to it. And it's very, very cumbersome and not at all a pleasant experience for her. So as I mentioned, here's maybe another good way to refer to it. I show this slide a lot when I'm doing webinars and training programs for business people. And many of them tell me, I never really thought about it that way before. And I ask them, would you eat your lunch here in this environment? Of course we wouldn't. It's not a sanitary place to eat. And we shouldn't be subjecting infants to that as well. Now, as I mentioned, the room also does have to be functional for milk expression. And this photo illustrates some of the key components to what a functional space would look like according to the DOL. They have to provide a comfortable chair. And we like to suggest that businesses consider a chair similar to this one. This is a very comfortable chair, provides really good back support for the parent who is expressing milk. There are armrests for them to rest their arms on. And best of all, it's wipeable. And certainly we have learned after the pandemic that being able to wipe that surface clean will help improve sanitation. They also have to provide a flat surface. This company provided a little round table. This is actually a lactation space at a large hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. And I thought it was a beautiful room. They actually have a suite of these rooms. There's about 3 or 4 of them, and they're all side by side. Each one has they're fully enclosed. They have their own private door that can lock so that they can get that privacy. And then just outside these 3 rooms is a common sink area that parents can use to wash their hands before and after they pump, as well as to rinse out and clean out their breast pump parts. A sink is not required by DOL. It's a great thing to add if you're able to. If that isn't possible, then we urge businesses to find a space that's going to at least be near a source of running water. Now, another requirement to make a space functional is that there needs to be an electrical outlet to be able to power that pump. This mother is using a pump on a battery attachment feature, which is certainly one way to do that, but most people will need access to an electrical outlet. And finally, they have to provide a way to ensure privacy for the user. There doesn't have to be a lock on the door, but that's certainly something we recommend. I think it helps parents to feel more relaxed and comfortable when they know nobody is going to walk in on them. There are lots of solutions, I would say solutions galore for how this could be done. On the top left picture there, we see an example of a flexible space. This was a business in Queens, New York, where they provided little small nursing stations for multiple employees. They actually can house, I believe, about 8 different employees in this room. They have 4 stations on each side of the room, and each individual user is able to be afforded some personal privacy by using these partitions that they purchased at a home goods store. And each little space has a comfortable chair. There's an electrical outlet for each user. And this business actually opened it up not only to their own employees, but they also opened it up to anyone who works in the building where their offices are located. So I thought that was a great way to share space and make it possible for more people to have access to that support. In the top middle, that is a picture of a young lady who is breastfeeding. She works for the University of Indiana, and they have made all of their conference rooms available for the purposes of lactation. So that's another example of a flexible space. And if you're going to use something like a conference room, you just have to make sure that each individual user is going to be afforded privacy. You cannot decide to schedule a staff meeting during a time when parents are going to be expressing milk. So having conversations about how this will work to accommodate the needs of everyone will be super important. On the top right, this is a picture of a dressing room at a local Walmart store in northern Texas. And they took one of their larger dressing rooms and converted that to a lactation room. And what I heard from them was that they did have to install an electrical outlet but it wasn't expensive. It only cost a little less than $100 to provide that outlet. And all of the decorations inside this little space came from the home area of the store. And they made this space available both for employees and for patrons of the store who wanted to breastfeed while they were visiting the store. On the bottom left, that is a picture of an employee break room at a business in New York City. They make this room available to lactating employees as well. There's an electrical outlet in there. Most employees would use their own pump. There's a little fridge right across from the chair. You can see that small refrigerator there. And there's a nice lock on the door, so the parent can lock the room from the inside and hang a sign on the outside to let other workers know that it's in use. And you see there's a window. This window, I was in this room when I took the picture. The window overlooks a very busy park area. But they also did install a nice screen so that the parent needs privacy. They can lower that screen. In the bottom middle is a picture of what a hospital did, where they provided individual privacy using curtains. And you can see they actually provided breast pumps in this facility rather than having a shelf or a table or some kind of a tray for parents to put their pump on. They actually provide the pump for their employees. This is a hospital that has a really strong lactation team. It's a hospital up in Rhode Island, and they attach the pumps to a little rolling cart so that the pump can be moved around from spot to spot, and that seems to work really well for them. And in the bottom right, that is a picture of a manager of a fast food agency in Sacramento, California. This is a Carl's Jr. We don't see many of Carl's Jr. Restaurants here in Mississippi, but I know they're very popular in many areas of the country. And this employer, she's amazing. She told us she had 4 lactating employees, and they were able to accommodate all 4 of them simply by staggering their schedule. And they did use a storage area that housed paper products and things along that line to allow the employees to pump in, and that worked well. Now, the other component of the law is enforcement. This is a really, really big deal. So employees can now take action in several ways, and this benefit actually began in April, just this past April. So as I mentioned earlier, one option is to file a complaint with the U.S. Department of Labor, the Wage and Hour Division, and they can call their toll-free number, which I believe we've included in your handout, or they can visit the Department of Labor website if they choose to go that route. And I will note that it is illegal for their employer to fire them or discriminate against them because they filed that complaint with the DOL. They also can call a free helpline from the Center for Work-Life Law or from the organization A Better Balance. These are 2 fantastic organizations, provide a lot of great resources. These are included in your handout as well, and they're available in both English and Spanish. And they can get some free information from the legal teams at these organizations on what their legal rights are and what their options are if their employer is not supporting them. The third option is they now can choose to file a lawsuit against their employer, and this is what's called a private right of action. They can sue if their employer violates their break time requirement, or even if they indicate they're not going to be able to provide private space, or maybe they provide private space, but it doesn't meet the requirements of the law. Maybe there's no place to plug up their electric breast pump, or it's not really private. Things along that line, or maybe they're asking multiple people to use the same space with not any individual privacy. So if the space is not meeting the requirements of the law and the employer says, tough cookies, we're not going to be able to provide you what you need, then the employee has the right now to file a lawsuit. They can sue for monetary compensation for lost wages, and in some cases, or many cases, they can sue for twice the amount of their lost wages. They can also sue for emotional distress, for attorney fees, lawsuit costs, punitive damages, and other economic harms. Now, I will say employees must notify their employer if they feel the space is inadequate, and they must give the employer 10 days to correct the situation. But if the employer just says right off the bat, we're not doing it, then they don't have to wait that 10 days. They can file a lawsuit that day. Now, another law that passed, and we're not going to go into great detail on this, but I want you to look it up, and we provided a link to the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This law is called the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, and it went into effect just a few weeks ago on June 27th. And according to this law, it requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations to pregnant workers. And that means allowing them to take extra breaks, perhaps, if they need to use the restroom more frequently, to maybe keep water nearby to stay hydrated, or maybe snacks if that helps them keep from getting nauseous, and possibly even to reassign them to different duties if part of their job requires them to lift heavy objects, or there's other physical demands that are going to put them or their baby at risk. Now, what's also exciting about the PWFA is that it specifically states that it requires employers to provide these reasonable accommodations either during pregnancy or for pregnancy-related conditions, which includes lactation. So we now have two different avenues where mothers and other parents are going to be able to get the support. And as I understand it, these provisions are not limited to gender. So that's important to note as well. Now, part two, I want to talk about just a few tips for supporting employees. Just some strategies we have found over the years have been helpful. We do know from research that employment is a major reason why many women either start out not breastfeeding at all, or they start off wanting to do both. They want to breastfeed and use formula because they know that they are returning to work. And we also see for those mothers who do start out breastfeeding, many of them will wean their babies earlier. One study found that 80% of breastfeeding employees stop breastfeeding before their first month back at work is up. So something is happening in that first month that is causing these parents to believe that this is not going to be workable for them. Another study found that half of new parents say that their employment plans affected their decisions. So we know this is a really big deal. And certainly among low-income parents, those of you who work in hospitals or you work for the WIC program, we do serve a large number of low-income and socioeconomically disadvantaged populations. And these individuals sometimes have the most difficult time because they have the least amount of autonomy. This contributes to disparities, and also we believe contributes to significant infant mortality rates due to lack of breastfeeding. One study conducted in 2016 found that 60% of women say they do not have the time and space they need to express milk at work. Now, this study was done before the Pump Act was put into place, but 60% of women, that is a really huge number. And they also found that when women do have accommodations, they are 2.5 times more likely to be breastfeeding exclusively at 6 months. So we know that this is an important issue. And we also know that the challenges of combining breastfeeding and milk expression with work can be very, very difficult, especially in some of the non-office type settings like factories and restaurants, retail stores, housekeeping jobs, and other environments, including hospitals. And I want those of you who are with a hospital to remember that these issues, we're not just talking about nurses, we're talking about your cafeteria workers and your housekeeping staff and all of your lower wage staff as well. So there can be a lot of issues. I want to just hit on a couple of major issues. One issue has to do with maternity leave. It's been suggested in some studies that parents need about 6 weeks and preferably even longer to recover fully from pregnancy and childbirth and to really get their milk production off to a good start. But I read about one study that found that 1 in 4 new parents, 23% of them, return to work within 2 weeks after the birth. So not having sufficient maternity leave, and especially for low-income families where they cannot afford to take leave without pay, is going to be an issue. And we know that this disproportionately affects African American women who return to work much sooner than people in other populations. We also see from research that African American parents are more likely to be working full-time or to be working more than one job, and they typically work in the most challenging job settings. So one of the things that we recommend to new parents is that they reach out to their supervisor and their HR department during pregnancy to discuss what their options will be for returning to work after the baby is born. So one option is to encourage them to phase back to work in a little bit more gradual manner, because that could really help their body to adjust a little more easily to being separated from the baby. So maybe, for example, they could work part-time for a week or two before resuming work full-time. That would help their body kind of get into the groove of milk expression. They might be able to work remotely for at least some of the time. We've had some parents who would work remotely a couple of days a week, so they're working from home and they're directly breastfeeding their baby and coming into the office or to the business 2 or 3 days a week. Won't work in every business, obviously, but it might work in some types of businesses. Some businesses will allow the parent to take off one day in the middle of the week, perhaps Wednesday. And that way they're only separated from the baby for a couple of days at a time. And then they have the weekend to kind of recoup and rebuild their milk production before they're separated the next week. And if none of these options are available or it just isn't going to work, they could consider, instead of returning to work on Monday, what about going back to work for the first time on a Thursday and only working 1 or 2 days, and then you have the weekend to kind of recover and adjust to that separation. That can also help them to rebuild their production before they're away from their baby now for that full week. Also, we just want to throw out the idea of direct breastfeeding. The CDC and the Food and Drug Administration in their National Infant Feeding Study few years ago found that when parents are able to have direct access to their baby at work, that they breastfeed exclusively for much longer durations. So that might include having a caregiver bring the baby to the mother. I talked to a nurse not too long ago who told me that her partner brought the baby up to her 2 or 3 times during her long 12-hour shift, and she just directly fed the baby. What a wonderful partner to do that for you. I also talked to a parent in my community who was a school teacher, and her mother was keeping her child for her during the school day, and her mother brought the baby up a couple of times a day so that she could breastfeed, and that helped her to breastfeed directly for almost a year. So she did really well. In some businesses, not all, but in some businesses, it might even be possible to have the baby at the workplace with the mother. And we're seeing a growing increase in the number of mothers who are able to do that. And there's a great website. I don't think I put this in your handout, but it's called babiesatwork.org, where they have a lot of testimonial success stories from businesses who've done this. Some sample liability release forms that could be used to release the business from liability when the baby is in the workplace, as well as some sample guidelines that could be followed. I also like to remind parents that another way of directly breastfeeding is to find a childcare provider who is located near where they work rather than near where they live. And that might enable the parent to actually just go and be with the baby particularly during the lunch break or whatever that longer meal break that they're provided. Just another way she could eat her sandwich while she's feeding her baby and enjoy some reconnection with the baby. And so maybe that would be an option. Now, we always like to urge parents to talk with their supervisor and start that conversation as early as possible, preferably in their pregnancy, because this just gives their boss a little bit of time to make some special arrangements if those are going to be needed. I also urge parents to document their requests. It's really important to have a paper trail so that down the road, if they do need to file any kind of charges or they want to report a complaint with the DOL, they've got a little bit of backup documentation. So we do have a sample letter that could be used. This is found at the Office on Women's Health and some of the Toolkit resources for the business case for breastfeeding. And I believe we included that link in your handout as well. So it's just a sample letter that a parent could use to notify their business that they are going to need this support. I also urge parents, when they have that conversation with their employer or their supervisor, to focus on her needs rather than trying to challenge her supervisor. And so in other words, rather than walking in with a copy of the law and saying, you need to support me, here's a copy of the law and you need to do this for me, that doesn't always come across very well to an employer. So we've kind of worked on developing some sample language that new parents could use. And we've tweaked this language a little bit over the years. We've shared this language with probably hundreds of employers across the country. I have done a lot of work with national business organizations and have shared language. And we kind of come up with language that seems to work really well for the employer and for the employee. And it goes like this. It is important to me to be a good employee and contribute to making this a great place to work. It's also important to me to breastfeed my baby. In fact, my doctor has urged me to continue breastfeeding for my baby's long-term health and for my own health. I'm going to need your help to make that happen. And I have a few ideas that we could talk about. We have included this language in your handout, so you don't have to write this down. I have made copies of this. I printed it on index cards and made that available to new parents. I tell them you can use your own words for sure, but what the main emphasis on this kind of language is, first of all, right off the bat, letting the employer know that the employee desires being a good employee. They care about the business. Employers want to hear that their employees really do care about their job. But then you also say, it's also important that I breastfeed my baby. And remind the employer that the doctor has recommended this. This is super important. Employers very much care about what the doctor has advised. You want to let them know, I need your help. And you want to let them know, I've already been thinking about this. I've got a few ideas that I'd like to talk to you about. Another great tool that can be used in having that conversation is a document called My Lactation and Work Plan. We developed this plan for the New York resources we created for the state of New York a few years ago. They have a toolkit called Making It Work. And in that toolkit, in the employee booklet, is this My Lactation and Work Plan. And then we did receive permission with the Ohio Department of Health. We developed a whole program of resources for Ohio that were specific to their state. And we branded that with permission from New York to be specific to the state of Ohio. So that is available. But it just gives the employees something piece of paper to walk in to share with their employer, to say, here's the things I want to talk to you about. Now, another great way to support parents is to help them get off to a great start with breastfeeding from the very beginning. This will help them maximize their ability to produce sufficient milk. So that includes things like skin-to-skin care right after the birth. We have a lot of hospitals in Mississippi that are now designated as baby-friendly. So you guys already do this quite naturally. If you are in a community where your hospital is not providing this practice, you can urge parents to request that the hospital allow them to hold their baby's skin to skin. What that will do is jumpstart milk production so that they will begin the process of calibrating a really strong and robust milk production that they're going to need once they return to work. And it can also help the baby learn to latch appropriately. Lots of wonderful benefits of skin to skin. And I wanted to mention that I just came across a brand new study. It was released like 2 or 3 days ago from the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine. It's found in the Breastfeeding Medicine Journal. And this study found that every minute of skin-to-skin care will increase milk production. And they found that the increased production is as much as 3.7 milliliters per week. So that's 1 minute of skin-to-skin. Can you imagine what a whole hour of skin-to-skin would do in boosting milk production? and it could actually be up to 7 ounces of milk extra per week if the mother was breastfeeding and also doing skin to skin for an hour every day, maybe in the evening time when she sits down and relaxes and watches television. Think of what an hour of skin to skin could do in boosting production. So it's a really important way to help them establish a good production. While she's home, we do encourage parents to breastfeed exclusively and not to start supplementing early on, because again, once she's separated from her baby, it's going to be just a little bit more challenging to maintain her production. And if she starts off with a robust production from the beginning, it will really help her to be able to continue breastfeeding. I love to teach mothers a wonderful concept that Nancy Moorbacher came up with. It's called the magic number. And she published her kind of theory around this in a blog post on her website. And I think I included that link as well. And what she does is she suggests that while the parent is on maternity leave, that they count the total number of times that they typically breastfeed their baby in a 24-hour period. Whatever number that is, it may be 8 times, 9 times, 10 times, whatever that number is becomes their magic number. Urge the mom to write down that number on a big, bright sticky note and tape it to the refrigerator or wherever they frequent to remind them that every 24 hours, once they return to work, they need to either directly breastfeed and or express their milk to reach that magic number. And that is what will help them to maintain their production long term. So I love that concept of the magic number. It's easy and it makes a lot of sense because a lot of parents, unfortunately, will stop breastfeeding as much, or maybe they are discontinuing a pumping session at work, and then things begin to dwindle and they don't realize what happened. Finally, I like to remind parents to get help. If they're using most of their precious maternity leave time trying to overcome problems, it's going to be a lot more challenging for them once they're separated from their babies. So you want to make sure parents are connected to lactation consultant at the hospital where they delivered, to the WIC program if they're eligible for WIC, or to private practice lactation consultants, as well as to counselors in the community and groups like La Leche League, the Black Mothers Breastfeeding Association, and other groups. I do want to mention a lot of parents believe they need to start pumping immediately after the birth, and they need to fill their freezer with this gigantic reserve of milk. And I have no problem if a parent feels like they have a lot of extra milk at certain times of the day. I know I always had a lot more milk in the morning hours, and I would begin pumping or expressing during that time. And, I would get about an extra 2 or 3 ounces by doing that after the baby fed. And that adds up after a while. That was a great way to provide some extra milk. But the problem with trying to build the reserve is sometimes parents create a problem of overproduction of milk. And you might think that's not a problem to have too much milk, but it can lead to a lot of problems. It can lead to inflammatory mastitis, which is a breast infection, can cause excessive leaking, can cause issues with lactose overload in the baby, which can make babies really fussy and colicky. So instead of filling the freezer or feeding the freezer, I suggest that they feed their baby rather than trying to worry about putting so much milk in the freezer. Parents can also begin thinking about preparing the baby. A lot of times they start on day 1. They want to get that baby used to a bottle, but that really isn't necessary. They can coax that baby to take an artificial nipple with a baby bottle, usually around 2 weeks before they go back to work. And that usually is sufficient. Now, if the baby is older than 2 months of age, they might resist taking that bottle. And I like to remind parents that consider those little feedings as practice feedings. That means you don't have to replace a feeding at the breast. You just offer a tiny bit, maybe just an ounce or so once a day, just to get the baby used to accepting a bottle nipple and taking milk. Maybe if the mother could express her own milk and put that in the bottle, the baby will be more likely to accept it. Sometimes babies will take an artificial nipple better from a family member or somebody else than they will from the parent. Another tool that we created in New York and adapted for Ohio, helps parents to get a little bit organized. And it's called the Return to Work Checklist, which is just a way of helping parents get a little bit more organized and set up a bit of a routine that will help them feel that they're a little bit more in control or on top of things. We have learned in New York especially, and now in Ohio, that this tool has been really helpful in helping to decrease stress by organizing their to-dos in a manageable way. And finally, I want to remind parents to engage their family members for support. They may have a mother or a mother-in-law or some other family member who's going to be providing childcare, but they may also want to talk to their partner about getting support as well. One of the stories I love to share is a dad that we met in, I don't remember now which state I was in, but this dad's, the mom told us he was in charge of preparing her pumping bag, her back to work bag. She had a diaper bag for the baby that went with the child care provider, and she had her own bag that had her breast pump and all the things she needed to express milk. And her partner was the one who was responsible for cleaning out those bags at the end of the day, washing out all the breast pump parts, and repacking the bag. The night before, he would take any milk she was going to be providing to the baby out of the freezer and put it in the refrigerator to defrost. And by the next morning, he would pull out that milk and put that back in the baby's bag and put both bags by the back door. So the mother, all she had to do was really focus on getting herself ready and breastfeeding her baby. And I thought, what a great dad this is. Part 3, I want to quickly touch on a few pointers when doing outreach with employers. Remember that for employers, legislation is a powerful motivator. So HR managers in particular, it's their job to ensure that their company complies with all of the federal laws that will affect employees. So now that the Pump Act has that recourse for employees to file lawsuits with quite substantial damages if they're not supported, the law is now going to be a very, very big motivator for employers once they know about it. But I would just caution you again to be careful about walking into a business and saying, you have to support them, here's the law, because that can kind of come across as a bit of a veiled threat. What I often say to employers is, we know it can be a little overwhelming trying to figure out what all the new laws are and how to comply. And every business is different. How it's going to work in each different is going to be a little different. So we're here to be a resource for you. We've worked with businesses. We have a lot of great solutions that we can share with you. And we're happy to assist you in helping this work for you. And businesses like that. They like knowing that they're getting free help and support. Just remember also that recruitment and retention of employees is a huge motivator for them. So you want to mention the studies that show that when we support lactating employees, it becomes a great recruitment advantage. We also want to share the business case for breastfeeding with them. In other words, what are the bottom line benefits? Companies need to know that they can enjoy a 2-to-1 return on their investment. So in other words, for every dollar they spend supporting their employees with lactation, they would be able to earn $2 back. That's huge. And we've also seen that ROI can be even higher, could be 3-to-1 or even higher when companies go beyond the basics of the law and really show their employees that they care by providing extra amenities. And these benefits come to them in the form of lower healthcare costs. In fact, we have seen in one study, 90% of formula-fed babies will experience illness in their first year of life, while less than half of breastfed babies experience illness. So that translates into high costs as well as higher risk of having to miss work to take care of a sick baby. This was a little chart here showing us what studies are showing I would call it the unparalleled health benefits of breastfeeding in terms of a lower risk of type 2 diabetes in the baby, lower risk of SIDS, lower risk of respiratory infections. And look at this, a significantly lower risk, 250% lower risk of a baby having to be hospitalized if they are lactating. We also see lactation support gives a big boost to healthcare savings. One company found they documented a savings of $2,146 per lactating employee for each year that employee is lactating. So that's a huge benefit for employers. Lower absenteeism, as I mentioned, is huge. One study found that 3 out of every 4 one-day absences, so 75% of these one-day absences due to child illness were taken by employees or who had formula-fed infants. And another study found that one-day absences occur 2 to 3 times more often when the baby is not breastfeeding. Language I like to use with employers is breaks are predictable. Absences are not. We can predict the breaks by scheduling for them and planning for them. What you can't plan for is having a sick baby. And certainly another thing employers are very interested in is the role and effect of presenteeism. And this is simply means employees are not necessarily physically absent. Absenteeism means they are physically not there at work. Presenteeism means the employee is physically present, but not necessarily mentally. And that could be due to sickness or fatigue, stress, and just dealing with overwhelming demands. And we can see that breastfeeding can help lower the rate of presenteeism because it lowers those stress levels for the parents. Lower turnover rates, we see the national retention rate after delivery of a baby is about 59%. So about 59% of new mothers go back to work after giving birth, which is that's huge. That means almost 40% of them are not coming back to work. And companies, however, that have lactation accommodations are reporting a greater than 94% return to work rate. Now, this is really important because the cost of replacing a worker who doesn't come back to work is very high. In fact, the replacement cost is about 1.5 times for whenever they have to replace that employee with somebody else. So another little language to use with employers is let's retain the ones we have rather than having to retrain new employees. Productivity and loyalty are also a great way to boost the bottom line for employers. Whenever you have employees who are happy in their job and feel that their needs for family and their personal needs are being met, they are more productive and they are more loyal. They stick with the business for a much longer period. Plenty of studies that have documented that. So I do want to also mention that communications is very important, and we urge parents to start that conversation. But a lot of times parents don't bring up that conversation, and that's where it's important for employers to know that they can bring up the conversation. I love to tell them this story about this young man. His name is Brandon, and he works for a Goodwill store in Indianapolis, Indiana. And when he found out that these 2 employees of his were pregnant, he sat them down privately to ask them about what their needs were going to be during pregnancy and to let them know he was going to support their needs for taking care of themselves throughout their pregnancy. He's just an amazing individual. And he also tells them, he's very proactive, and he says to them, how you're going to end up feeding your baby is obviously your personal decision, but I want you to know that if you decide you want to breastfeed, we will support you here with that at this business. We will provide you with a private space. We will give you the break time that you need to be able to express your milk. Both of these young ladies told me when we did their interviews that they had both planned to formula feed because they were going back to work. And when Brandon told them he would support them, they both made the decision to breastfeed, and they ended up breastfeeding their babies for well over a year. They had nothing but gushing praise for how supportive this employer was for them. And one of the mothers, the one on the right, told me, she said, I never want to work for anybody else or anywhere else because of how good I am treated here in this company. So that's really important for employers to know that they have that power to really make a difference in the lives of their families. I do want to quickly talk about a couple. We don't have time to go into great detail, but I do want to mention a couple of solutions for the 3 new categories of employees who are now covered under the PUMP Act. So I'm going to talk about nurses, I will talk about school teachers, and agricultural workers. So of course, all salaried workers would be covered, but these are 3 that sometimes people struggle with. So for hospitals, I recommend hospitals go ahead and set up a dedicated lactation room, because it's a large organization, a lot of employees, and having a multi-user area is probably going to be really important. There's lots of options in a hospital. Many hospitals will convert a patient room or maybe an exam room, or lots of times hospitals have a lot of these consult rooms that are scattered all over the hospital. Sometimes storage areas can be retrofitted to be a private lactation space. And the bonus of using a hospital room, so this is a former patient room at a hospital in New York City that I visited. And I really like this idea because they have an adjoining restroom that is already in place. So the parent has a place where they can go wash their breast pump parts out. This was a lovely little room at this hospital, not a huge patient room, but it certainly served the purpose. One of the hospitals I visited in Rhode Island set up particular places for their physicians, because they said, physicians have special needs. So they placed lactation rooms near the emergency room, right near the radiology department, and outside all of the operating rooms. And then they outfitted them with a computer, because many of the doctors said they wanted to continue charting and handling other issues while they were pumping. At Ochsner Hospital in New Orleans, this is a lovely facility. It's a humongous facility, wonderful, wonderful organization. They provide portable lactation pods in various locations all around their very huge campus. And they also have consult rooms near the elevator, which is also right off of the main waiting room on each floor of the hospital. And they converted those little consult rooms to an employee lactation room. So everybody knows in that hospital, if you need to express milk, you go near the elevator, and you can get to those rooms super easily by going to the elevator. And outside the rooms, they have this lovely little slide. You can let people know if the room is going to be available or not. Another sign that says, please knock before entering. There is a lock on the door, but that just provides a little extra support. In terms of schools, we've seen both in K through 12 schools and in university settings, lots of different options. The University of Mississippi here in Mississippi has lactation pods that they have placed in key areas around the campus, including their student store, which you see listed here, but they've also placed these pods around the perimeter of their coliseum where basketball games are played, and the football coliseum. And then they also have provided lactation rooms in about 15 of their major buildings across the campus, and they strategically located them so that employees could get to a lactation room within no more than a 2-minute walk. So I thought that was a great goal that they have done at the University of Mississippi. Now, a high school in Connecticut set up a lactation room on one side of their teacher resource library. They put some curtains over those open shelving units so that the lactating employee has a little private space. And they do have a lock that can be locked on the inside and a sign you can put on the outside. So if a teacher needs to get into the resource room and they see that there's a sign, then they know somebody's pumping in there and they'll come back a little later. Another school that I visited uses space inside a nurse's office, a little private area. This is kind of the office area for the nurse, not really the exam room area. And that worked really well in that high school, or actually it was an elementary school. And I've also talked to a lot of universities and hospitals and even large businesses that have maybe a really large plant, and they have established policies that require any new construction or renovations must now include creation of lactation space. So this is a brand new building that is being built on the campus of the University of Rhode Island. And you see, this is actually the pharmacy school. And this area where the ladder is where the campus pharmacy is going to be located. Right across the hall from this is an open door, and that will end up being the lactation room in that building. So that's a wonderful idea to just proactively think ahead. Certainly for agriculture, the challenges are really huge for farm workers because there isn't private space. One option we've talked to people about is using pop-up tents that are placed near the employee's workstation. And one large strawberry and blueberry farm in California not only provides these pop-up tents, which actually work pretty well. They're well ventilated at the top. The employee can zip it closed, and then they can pop it out and pop it back in place again very easily. An employee can actually just set this up right near their workstation where they're picking. They also allow employees to park their vehicle right near their workstation. And if they don't have a private vehicle, they can use a company vehicle. This company partnered with the WIC program to provide privacy visors inside that vehicle so that the parent can pump in total privacy. And then finally, I wanted to mention most military branches do have lactation support policies in place now to ensure maybe not totally adequate, but at least some maternity leave, particularly before they would be deployed, and to be able to express the milk once they are deployed. One of my favorite stories comes from the Army Madigan base in Tacoma, Washington. And what they do there, they issue their employees, if they're going to be deployed and they're lactating, they issue them a breast pump. So they actually are able to get a pump right from the company. And then they take that pump with them when they're deployed. And they are able to use the generators that are set up in the tents that are installed in the fields wherever their workstation is going to be. And this base allows parents to ship their milk home using dry ice. They ship it back to the States, and get this, they use Army transport planes or they use FedEx planes, and they can get the milk back home again very, very quickly. And when I interviewed the manager of this program, she told me to tell everyone, if the Army can figure this out, anyone can. So now in our last portion of this webinar, I do want to talk about our exciting new resources, the new Mississippi WINS Toolkit that is designed for assisting employers and local advocates with improving support for lactating people. This toolkit was adapted from the Ohio Department of Health toolkit that is called the Workplace Plus Toolkit, and I want to thank them for allowing us permission to use some of their excellent resources to adapt for our purposes here in Mississippi. We did rebrand them, and they are very Mississippi specific now, but they originally came from Ohio. So hats off to Ohio for all the great work that you all allowed us to use. So I did want to let you know that these resources are available now at the CHEER website. The resource is listed right here, and it's also listed in your handout. So I want to quickly go through some of the resources that we're so excited about. We do have an employer guide that is kind of the centerpiece. It's a beautiful, beautiful document that is designed to give employers very, very practical step-by-step instructions on how to implement lactation accommodations. It is available as a PDF file, so you can easily email this to employers in your community. You could print it out if you're going to be doing an in-person visit with an employer. It has information about the business case for breastfeeding, so those bottom line benefits. It also has information about the laws, including all of the new Pump Act and Pregnancy Worker Fairness Act laws. So that information and lots of links to the Department of Labor website are included so employers can learn more. We've also included in this guide lots of great practical solutions in a wide variety of industries, as well as a communication plan that they may want to use when they are thinking about making sure their employees know about these provisions that are in place. I love this booklet. I just keep looking at it over and over and over again. It just thrills me every time I look at it. One of my favorite sections to the toolkit is the spotlight on some Mississippi businesses. So we were very gratified to be able to feature 3 very important businesses that have model practices in place for their employees. That includes Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Mississippi, the University of Mississippi, and the Greenwood LaFleur Hospital, which is located in the Mississippi Delta. So we're super excited about those. And if you are aware of other businesses, if you live in Mississippi and you're aware of other businesses that have great protections in place, I want to give a shout out to the Delta Health Alliance, which is a model employer as well. Those write-ups are going to be included in our business resource section. So we have more resources that are still coming. So let us know if you are aware of a business that has model support. We also developed a series of industry-specific tip sheets. And these are designed to give much more detail specific to various industries. So we have one that's kind of some general solutions, as well as one highlighting solutions in the education sector, healthcare, manufacturing, restaurants, and retail. And then we have another booklet that has lots of great resources for the employer, a checklist for accommodating lactating employees, sample support policy, sample employee communications, and we have also recorded a much shorter condensed webinar from the one that I'm doing with you all today. And this webinar is about, I believe, around 20 minutes in length. It just hits the highlights of what they're required to do and a few tips for getting them off to a good start, and so a list of some great resources. So you could share the link for that webinar with your employers, and there is a handout that goes with that that lists some of the most important resources employers may want to turn to. In addition to that, to all the employer resources, we also have created resources that are designed for hospitals in particular, including a beautiful booklet on supporting breastfeeding employees in the hospital setting or other healthcare settings, along with a sample hospital lactation policy. So we're super excited about that. We've also created a short recorded video that is specific to how to implement lactation support in the hospital setting. It was recorded about a year ago, and the link to that video, if you are with a hospital and you haven't attended that webinar, you can check out the link to that. That gives some really detailed step-by-step instructions for how to implement lactation support in the hospital setting. I'm glad that Brenda Bandy is on this call today. She is from the Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition and a huge, huge, huge breastfeeding advocate. She has done so much for the state of Kansas in promoting and supporting breastfeeding. They have a website called kansasbusinesscase.com, and there is a host of phenomenal resources listed there, including a lot of great resources for supporting employees in the school setting, as well as supporting students. A lot of great resources there. So check out their link that is included in your resources as well. The Office on Women's Health out of HHS also has some industry-specific solutions, as well as a cadre of videos. We've recorded for the OWH 29 industry-specific videos that are available at the Office on Women's Health website. The U.S. Department of Labor, another very important resource. They have a brand new fact sheet, number 73, on FLSA protections for employees to pump breast milk at work. And this does include all of the language and requirements of the new law. And I mentioned A Better Balance earlier. They are a great resource for providing legal help to parents. One of my favorite things on their website is something called Talking to Your Boss About Your Pump. And this one features one from Pennsylvania, but they are specific to each and every state. So I wanted you to know about this. Is just a resource for parents to help them know what their rights are in their particular state. We'll give them a lot of great guidance. Also, I will mention the Department of Health at Ohio Their toolkit is available on their website. You can go here to their breastfeeding website and click on the Worksite tab to access resources for employers, employees, as well as resources for you as advocates. And I always like to make sure I include the important work that we did in the state of New York. And these are the resources we developed for New York. And one of the ones I wanted to in particular point out is this green booklet, which is designed for family members who will be serving as childcare providers for that breastfed baby. We know that among low-income populations, many of them cannot afford childcare, and they are using family members for their support. So this booklet is specific for the family members. So they're the only state that I know of that I've been associated with that provides resources for the parents. And I'll close with this wonderful quote from an elementary school principal that I interviewed. And he one time said to me, I thought it was so powerful, I had him repeat it so I could write it down. And he said, "The things that matter most in life should never be impacted by things that matter least. Breastfeeding matters most in the big scheme of things. It's an investment we make in our staff who are priceless, and we are making a difference." Just that gives me chills and my eyes get teary every time I think about that kind of support from a manager, that they recognize what matters the most and that what we're doing to support our employees is an investment in their lives. So the bottom line for us and for families and for businesses is that we are working to meet the needs of today's workforce, and not just today's workforce, but the workers of the future, each of whom I believe deserve the opportunity to have the healthiest start in life possible so that they can now have a lifetime of better health outcomes because we made it just a little easier for their parents to be able to meet their breastfeeding goals. So I want to thank you. This is my email if anybody would like to reach out to me individually. And again, I'll point you back to that website at CHEER where all of our new resources are housed. We'd love to hear from you. If you have comments about what you've heard today or you have questions that you would like to ask. So Kat, I'm going to turn it back over to you to see if there is anything else, any questions that we might have received during the chat box. And I'll turn my video back on now.
Sorry, I was muted. So I believe we have a few questions and some comments as well. So let's see. Naomi was saying there's a bill before Congress now addressing airline flight crews. They're asking for letters to our legislators advocating for the support of the bill. And she put a link there for the campaign as well. So if you are able to access that, you can support that as well. Let's see.
Thank you, Naomi, for doing that. I am aware of that new bill, and it's the first step that has been made. I believe Senator Merkley was behind that. Now that the bill, they had to do a lot of compromising to get the Pump Act to pass, and they didn't want to limit the ability of that Pump Act to, because it's going to affect 9 million people are going to be affected. They felt that that was super, super important that we compromise to get the bill out there and passed. And now we're working hard to address the remaining few little people who still need to be supported. So if you're in a position where you can advocate for that bill, not everybody's able to do that, but if you are able to, we certainly urge you to reach out to your Congress representatives and your senators and let them know how you feel about this, that you feel that all employees have the right to be able to express their milk. So thank you, Kat, for pointing that out.
Of course. We have another question from Erin. I just had a consult with a nurse that will be returning to work in a couple of weeks. Her supervisor is only allowing 2 to 15 minutes and one 30-minute break for her 12-hour shift. The supervisor is not willing to work with her. She is worried that she will not have enough time. I will send her the resource handout, but is that adequate time to really pump?
No, it is not. If she's working in a 12-hour shift, she needs to be able to express her milk every 2 to 3 hours. So 3 pumping breaks is not going to be sufficient to maintain her production during a 12-hour shift. So I would urge this nurse to have another conversation, to share these resources, and to remind her supervisor that they are supposed to accommodate them with reasonable time each time they need to do that. Now, it is reasonable, if a mother wants to pump every hour, that's probably not very reasonable in most situations. But I think being able to pump every 2 to 3 hours is what is normally recommended, would be considered reasonable. And if she's not getting support, and it could be her supervisor is simply unaware of this employee's legal rights. We find that HR people are very aware of what the laws have to say, but that doesn't always trickle down to individual supervisors. So if she isn't getting what she needs, her next recourse would be go to your HR director, because they know and should know what their rights are, and allow the HR in your hospital to intervene and have a conversation with the supervisor about what is going to meet her needs. And if that isn't work, she has a legal recourse now if she chooses to do so.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kathy. And then Kaylee has a comment. So on the handout on the last page under resources for breastfeeding advocates, the link to the Ohio Department of Health Advocacy Guide is missing. Could you please share that link? So yes, we will go ahead and share that and update the document as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I will say I do have that Ohio Department of Health website listed in other places on that document. As long as you get to the Ohio Department of Health and that worksite page, there's a tab for employers, a tab for employees, and a tab for advocates. So you can easily get to that from any of those other links. But Kat, if you can send that out also, that would be terrific.
Definitely, definitely. And then let's see. And then Molly McMillan asks, do you think the business case for breastfeeding will be updated anytime soon?
Good question. I don't work for the Department of Health and Human Services, and I don't know whether that's going to happen or not. I would invite you to visit the page of the Supporting Nursing Moms at Work at OWH, because they do have not only the business case for breastfeeding resources, but you can go to those industry specific tabs and get a lot of great information there. And I haven't checked that recently to see if all the Pump Act information has been updated, but hopefully they'll be able to do that. But I have no idea. I haven't heard that they are working on that. I hope they would. It would be great if they would, but I don't know. Good question.
All right, I believe that's all the questions we have so far. Does anyone else have any other questions? Any final comments? Kathy, you're receiving lots of thank yous for the information.
I'm reading those. They're lovely. Thank you all so much. You made my day. It looks like a lot of enthusiasm for supporting lactating employees in the workplace. And, I always tell people it is important to do outreach with employers in your community. The big employers are the ones that are employing large numbers of the families that you serve. But you also have to start with your own workplace at home. Start at home. And if your hospital or your WIC clinic or whatever organization you're with is not providing ideal model support, start there and then be a model. Be a model for your entire community and let other businesses in your community know, here's what we're doing right here in our facility. It's a great way to spread the joy and allow other employers to learn from your work. Oh, a wonderful comment from Naomi Bar-Yam. Oh my goodness, she is the queen of this worksite lactation. I didn't know you were going to be on, Naomi. I'm thrilled to see that. She said she wrote her dissertation on breastfeeding in the workplace in 1997. So gratifying to see how we have progressed in the last 25 years. Naomi, I bow. You are amazing in all the work you have done, and it's a real honor to have had you in this webinar with us today. You guys go check out her research. It's amazing.
All right, beautiful. So I believe those are all of our questions. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today. We had a wonderful time hearing about all this wonderful information, and the toolkit is available on our website, shareequity.org as well. And this webinar will be uploaded as well.
Thanks to everyone. Bye, everybody, and happy World Breastfeeding Week and National Breastfeeding Month. I wish you all the best.
Thank you.